Hey everyone, and welcome to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I'm your host, Victor Broden, and my guest today, once again, is Aaron Langmead, technical artist and evangelist from the UK.
Hello.
Welcome back to the show. You were on just 2 weeks ago, but today we are going to talk about something different. If you're unaware, today is the International Day for People with Disabilities, and we decided that we are going to talk a little bit about how to make accessible experiences inside Unreal Engine. But before I'm gonna let Aaron get started with this topic, I wanted to play the highlights reel. Since if you're unaware, if you just joined, we did release 426 today. So let's go ahead and watch it. All right, can we get some hype in chat for 426? I'm super excited to play around with some of the new volumetric stuff. Making pretty lightning. Anyway, Aaron, the floor is yours.
Great. Okay, thank you. So yeah, today I'm going to be running through a load of the different accessibility features that are built into the engine, and then also covering just a few different ways that you could make your game more accessible. Obviously, kind of a lot of the things that you can do to make your game more accessible to more people aren't necessarily things that are going to be just like a button press that you can do in the engine. They're just general kind of thought processes. So I'm going to be running through a load of those different features. So just as a warning, this video this presentation is going to be super scattershot because we're going to be covering loads of different bits in the engine. So we're going to be jumping between kind of like audio and gameplay and blueprints and UI and all of that good stuff. So I'm sorry if this is going to be a little bit of a mess, but I think that's kind of just going to be the way it is. So I'm going to add some caveats just to start with. So not all of the features that I'm going to be going over are going to work for all games, right? A lot of these things are going to be context sensitive, and they're going to be dependent on the type of game that you're building. And ultimately, obviously, all of this stuff is up to you as a designer, as an artist, as a programmer to implement. You obviously don't have to do any of these things, or you could try and find different approaches to them. So some features are going to take potentially a lot more work than others, whereas some are going to be really, really easy to implement. So some of the inbuilt features that we have are really easy to get set up and working, whereas some of the others may take kind of extensive work, and some of them may not be kind of financially viable for you to even do. And finally, there's often multiple implementation options. So the way that I've kind of built these particular features aren't necessarily the best way to do it. Some of them are better to implement in code. This is just kind of one way of doing it and kind of shows the final output. So just covering my backside on some of these things. It's also been built as part of a very rough demo. So I think the key thing to remember when we're talking about kind of like these accessibility options is that it is at its core about enabling more people to enjoy what we make, right? We want to be able to help these people, like different people or more people, play the kind of games that we're building and make it so they can have an enjoyable experience. One thing that I would recommend is to try not to tack on the accessibility features that you're building as an afterthought. A lot of people kind of think about, okay, well, I've got the game that normal people are going to play, and then I'm going to tack on all of these, kind of things for disabled people, and that's a really bad way of thinking about it, especially because accessibility features are for everyone, right? Like on some level, your game has to be accessible to start with, even if that is a kind of like a Dark Souls or something like that, because you could absolutely make Dark Souls much harder, to the point where it's basically unplayable. And there's lots of minor accessibility tweaks that people, kind of basically argue about on the internet all the time, right? Like whether you invert the y-axis on your controller is a big one that is an accessibility feature. So just one of those things to keep in mind. This should be thought about from day one when you're building your game. And you should be trying to build your game in a way that is going to be easily accessible and easily expandable into how you're building. So generally, accessibility is broken down into 4 key areas: hearing, sight, cognitive, and input. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through each one. And then for each step, we're going to go into Engine. I'm going to show you the potential things that you can do to make your game more accessible. Generally, these can be categorized into 2 general splits. So, kind of audio visual, and then the kind of motor and cognitive. So I'm going to start off with hearing. And that's mainly because I want to be able to turn a lot of this stuff off after I'm done, because while some of it, kind of might be fine at first, it's going to get really annoying really quickly if we're not careful. So we'll kick off with hearing first, and then we'll go through. So the key things that you can do with hearing impairment is obviously subtitling, right? That's the best thing that you can do for people who have difficulties with hearing, and a lot of people out there have disabilities with hearing, so it's definitely worth doing, and it's one of the features that is kind of there is an out of the box solution for subtitling in the editor. On top of this, we have visual cues as well. So this is useful not just for people who have, kind of hearing disabilities, but are also people who need to play with the sound off or just want to turn the audio off. They still need to be able to play the game, right? So creating visual cues for the player is an important and useful aspect. Splitting volume controls, again, this is a solution that's built into the engine. And the audio team have built an amazing kind of solution for being able to actually kind of create very complex volume controls. And also kind of when you're doing subtitling and when you're doing any in-game menu options, to make sure that you're using an easy to read font, kind of as you're going through for that subtitling, because obviously those people who have hearing disabilities, if they can't read the text because it's using some wacky Wingding-esque font, then that obviously needs to be fixed. So let's go into the demo. And again, I'm gonna apologize in advance here because I've built all of the audio. So we're about to experience some magic here. So I'm going to press play.
This area has been completely overtaken by worms. We need you to become the early bird, if you catch my drift. Yes, we are both nodding at the same time. We understand one another.
So it plays a short cutscene, and then we get full control, where we have some audio cues. So as I'm kind of moving around, you can kind of hear the character moving, and then whenever I peck on the ground, we'll get that nice pecking noise. So really annoying, but yeah. So I'm going to want to turn these off pretty soon. So the first thing that I want to go through is subtitling. Subtitling is really easy to implement. So inside your project settings, I'm just going to here, I'm just going to type in subtitle, and you get three core options here. So you can choose the font that you want to use, and this will also allow you to choose the size font that you use. Incidentally, if you change this font or you make that font bigger, you won't necessarily see that change happen straight away. You may need to restart the editor in order to see it. That had me a bit confused for a few minutes where I was trying to figure out why that wasn't updating. So just keep that in mind. And yes, for the chat, that is me on the voice of the chicken. So you just need to make sure subtitles are enabled, and that's on by default. I've forced subtitles off just so I can show you it without it. I'm just going to untick that option so that we have subtitles. And I'm also just going to turn down my audio now as well, so we don't have to listen to that every single time. So you can see now that I've got the subtitles coming up. And I'm going to just skip out of that. And then if I go into my audio section, I've got a few different audio tracks here that have been very poorly folded. And I have two here, so Chicken Intro and Chicken Intro 2. So whenever I import my audio, I'm going to get a WAV file, which I bring into the editor like this. And this is going to bring in a menu for me. And inside that, we have a subtitle section, so we can mark whether that subtitling is using mature language. We can choose to use manual word wrap or allow it to do it automatically for us. And then inside the subtitles array, we can actually write out all of the subtitle text that we're using. So in this instance, I've broken it up manually into two separate sections. This area has been completely overtaken by worms. And then 3 seconds into that audio cue, I switch over to this section. We need you to become the early bird, if you catch my drift. And that's actually all you need to get your subtitling working. So basically anything that has an audio cue with this subtitle text in, which again is a localized text data as well. So that will all get fed into your localization data. That will automatically just get brought up whenever you choose to add that text.
As a quick shout out, we did do a live stream.
Just to show you that one again, that's on the subtitle, and you can see we've got, yes, we are both nodding at the same time. We understand one another.
Hey, Aaron, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I had a little bit of a hiccup there. I just wanted to throw out as a quick throwback. We did have Paulo Sousa on a couple of months ago talking about localization in Unreal Engine. So if you're curious about how to use the little feature that Aaron just showed in terms of localizing your entire game, see if we can go ahead and get the link pasted in chat to that one in just a bit. But we did go through the entire sort of all of the tools that are available for localization in the engine.
Yeah. I mean, that was a really great one, because the localization tools are actually really robust and really good to use. Basically, as long as the you're using that text file type, it will automatically generate a localizable string, and then you can gather that and then swap it out, and it's really good. So yeah, definitely check out that stream. Again, one of the interesting things about accessibility, kind of we're talking about this as in terms of kind of like disability, but accessibility expands beyond that, and I would say that localization actually feeds into a lot of accessibility tools as well. So I've just turned down the volume on that just so we don't have to hear it too much. But one last thing I do want to cover on that. So we've got subtitles in our game. The next thing is actually splitting your audio. So you may want to split your dialogue to multiple different sets. And to do that, you can use these things called sound classes and custom mixing. So I've created a number of different sound cues here. One for dialogue, one for music, one for effects, and one for button over events. And these have a hierarchy which you can, again, control, and you can propagate, kind of volume settings and different settings like that across multiple children. So this is how you go about having like a master volume control, and then having individual sub-volume controls inside that as well. So for this one, I've kind of got these different audio cues, and then inside each individual audio cue. So if I look at the chicken squawk, you can see that I've set that audio cue class to effects, right? And then I'll turn up my volume again just so we can listen to this, and then I'm going to turn it off forever. So you can see that I'm kind of making that bark noise. I've actually added a volume mixer control, so I can kind of turn that down. And now I have no audio, or I can kind of set it to kind of like a mid-range. And you can see that's now, or here, I should say, that's a bit more easier to see, to hear, honestly. And let's just turn that audio off. And then inside your, so I'm just going to do this inside the accessibility options. The way that we set this up, so the actual sound mix, is for this control here, I'm actually getting that slider value and marking the class type that I want to affect, and then just adjusting my volume like so. And then inside my game settings, I have a set base sound mix, which basically reads in the mixer type that I'm using, and then lets me specify. And that's all I actually need for that. Then I can start editing it. So just on the mix kind of data set, if I go to this one, this custom mix here, all I need to do here is actually just plug in the master reference that I'm using, and it does apply to children past that, so I can kind of propagate all that information down. So that covers the two core audio types. There is also the creating audio cues as well. I haven't done a demonstration of that because that's more of a simple effect to actually create. You just do a particle effect that kind of does it, or do a UI effect that points the player into a particular direction so that they know that something's happened. So this is particularly useful if you've got a game that is reliant on audio for telling the player that something's happened or something is happening in the area around them. So definitely worth keeping in mind.
Hey Aaron, Bubasuka asked, can you easily tweak the subtitle in runtime, like size, font, background, etc.? Looks like you can only preset it in an editor.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So unfortunately, at the moment, you can only do a standardized setup. So you set the font that you want to use, and you set the font size that you want to use, and then that is locked in for that particular project. I've spoken to a few people on the engine team about adding some more functionality to this, and I'm going to be pushing that more. So that we can get some of these features added. I've got a list, almost like a wish list at the end of this presentation, to go through some of the accessibility features that I think would be really nice for us to get into the engine. And kind of rest assured that there's lots of people at Epic who've got kind of accessibility on the mind and are going to be pushing for those features to be added.
Had a second question on the topic of subtitles.
Sure.
.bmp asked, can you import standardized subtitle formats for your audio?
What do you mean by?
Not entirely sure.
We might have to come back. We might have to come back to that one because I'm not sure what they mean by standardized sets there. Was there anything else on audio?
Jobu Senpai asked, couldn't you make two actors of subtitle type and use interchangeably?
So I mean, the thing I'm talking about here is this is kind of like a default, just in the editor setting these things up. You can absolutely program and expand the functionality inside C++. That's really easy to do, assuming you know C++. So yeah, absolutely, you can expand all of these tools to do more and have that optionality there. The kind of the main thing that I want to cover is the kind of the out of the box Unreal solutions that you have available to you, just to make sure that you know where you would need to invest that time in.
Sounds good. Let's continue.
Okay, cool. So next up we have Sight, and for Sight we've got a number of things. Wow, that's taken a long time to load. I'm just I'm gonna not bother doing that. So we have avoid mouse-only control schemes. So this is mostly to do with fine precision controls. So there's absolutely ways around this while keeping to a mouse. That's kind of using kind of sticky buttons, or having buttons kind of automatically snap to nearby buttons that are as an option. So when it comes to user interface navigation, you're much better off having either keyboard navigation or a gamepad navigation that can be remapped to other controls. If you do go down the mouse input route, then kind of just be wary that people who have kind of difficulty with their vision might struggle to have that kind of very precise input control. And you may want to add support for things like having a larger mouse icon, so they can kind of more clearly find those points. Scale options for UI and game elements, so making your user interface bigger or smaller. Colorblind options for UI and game. Visibility modes for gameplay, so kind of being able to filter out different parts of the game so that players can focus on particular parts of the game. Adding screen reader support, or having audio cues for your buttons so that they'll play an audio text to tell you what that actual button is before they click on it. And audio cues for menu and gameplay, just covered that. And kind of avoiding flashing lights for people that may suffer from any kind of epilepsy. I don't want to go into too much detail on epilepsy, but there's a thing called the Harding test, which is used for film and TV that might be worth investigating. So let's make sure the audio is off now so that we don't have to listen to that soundtrack anymore. So we've got a number of accessibility options for gameplay and sight. I've actually added a few extra ones as well so that we can preview as a developer what it might look like for people with those particular kind of disabilities, like low or poor vision, or for colorblindness. So I've kind of shortcutted these to a few different types. I've got one which just blurs the screen, and this is really useful for being able to kind of visualize what your game is looking like for people with poor eyesight. You can actually increase or decrease the strength of this. This is a really easy thing to add. So inside my user interface, I've got an accessible preview, and all I've done is added a background blur, kind of UI that I can add only when I'm kind of in the editor mode and won't ship with it. And that will let me kind of like just see the kind of like the lower resolution display, so I can kind of see what this might look like for someone with low vision. And then I've also added some color LUTs, or lookup tables, which give me a visualization of what the game might look like for people with certain color blindness types. Now, it's really important to make sure when you're doing this that you're not inadvertently making your game just a colorblind visualizer, rather than shifting into a spectrum where people with that certain color blindness might be able to see. So just to be clear, this is showing us what an approximation of what someone with a particular color blindness type might be seeing. So I've got in the bottom left, though my worm UI is covering up a little bit of it because I haven't set my sort order correctly. I've got the kind of the different view modes. So people who are kind of red blind or green blind, and blue blind, and then red weak, green weak, and blue weak. This kind of shows us what these people might be seeing, kind of as an approximation. Obviously, it's impossible to actually see what they're seeing, but this does give us an idea. And what's really useful about this is that when we go into things like red blind and green blind, you can see that actually what was quite a visually distinct character from the background environment is now starting to merge into our background. So they're both sharing the same kind of yellowish coloring, though thankfully our worms are still very, very clear to see. So when you combine this with a low color, a low vision quality, you can see that the chicken was the kind of initially very distinct from that background. It's now even more so blur, kind of blending into that background, making that character quite difficult to see, except kind of maybe on the eye points. So this is really useful as a game designer to be able to kind of see what these people might be seeing, and then we can act accordingly, right? So we can either rely entirely on a color shifter, which would shift the spectrum into a view that the people with those particular color blindness would be able to see, or we can make changes to the actual aesthetic to make the character more visible, right? So we could change this chicken from this brown color to like a white if we wanted to, and that would make that character a bit more visible. Or we could add some extra character options so that we can customize our chicken and choose kind of different color palettes that colorblind people might be able to see. One other really useful thing that you can do as well inside the accessibility, kind of inside your accessibility options, is actually to create a material parameter collection of accessibility that has different color sets for different object types. So whatever types you might have in your game, you can create these kind of ranges, and then have options to be able to, kind of override colors for these particular types. So if I have a player color here, I could set this to something like this lovely pink color. And then inside my chicken asset, I can go to my material, bring in that parameter collection, and then have an option to override this chicken's color with a particular type. So if I have something like player color, that's going to give me that lovely pink, and then I can do a if statement, or I can do a lerp that's blending based on a particular parameter, right? So in this one, I'm going to have an alpha as well. So to keep it nice and easy, I could select kind of my alpha channel as being the decider of whether I'm going to use my normal chicken texture. And let's just do another component mask on that to make sure that we can see we've got parity on our lerp. So we can use the decider here of whether we're going to use our standard chicken texture, or whether we're just going to use this bright pink material. Now we've got this kind of like bright pink character, but when I kind of go through my color spectrum shifting, you can see that I can see my character much more clearly through the different modes. And while that makes the game uglier, it's not on by default for most players, so they'll be able to carry on looking at their game as it's been intended to look. But players who kind of this artistic direction is making the game demonstrably harder for them to play, it makes it much easier for them to be able to see it, and they would much rather have a game that was playable than a game that looked good for people that for when they can't even see it. Let's just attack some of these worms. Just undo that. Some other options that we have inside our game, we actually have got a colorblind shifting mode that you can activate for your game. So I've got a kind of an option here, and this is going to switch between the different color blindness modes, and it will shift the color palette into a spectrum that people of that particular color blindness will be able to see. And this one's again, it's a really easy option to implement. So if I go into my accessibility tricks, I've got a load of different ones here. We have a set color vision deficiency type, and then you can choose which one you want to switch between, the severity that you want, and again, you can expose all of these different options, and then you can choose to correct that deficiency as a toggleable option or you can show the correction with deficiency as well. So these are well worth kind of adding in, as they're really easy ones to add in. All you need to do is kind of build the user interface to let people turn these on and off. Another one is UI scale. So again, this one's quite easy to implement because there's a UI scaling element that you can add your objects to. So I've done this here for my game UI. So I can make this really big so that it's much more kind of visible for other people. And again, that one's really easy to implement. You just make sure that your actors are being placed inside a scale asset type. So if we just do scale box here, and then we have a value that we can set to user specified, and then just modify that value. So so this one is basically calling a function that is retrieving a new scale type, and then it's just setting the scale box type for those particular assets. And then finally, another one, this isn't a kind of an out-of-the-box solution, but it is very easy to build, is a high contrast mode. And what this does is uses the stencil buffer and the depth buffer and the custom depth buffer to basically mask out different portions of the game to make stuff more easily to see for different people. So in this one, I've marked my chicken and my worms into a different custom depth. And then I'm using a post-process to darken the rest of the game world and make the characters more easily visible, right? So even in kind of like a low vision quality mode, I can still very clearly see the character, and I can much more clearly see my characters that I'm going to, and then I can kind of move towards them as I would normally. Another final one as well is just reducing your camera shake or turning it off completely, just for comedy's sake, but also demonstration purposes. I've really whacked up the camera strength on this PEC, so you can turn that off again quite easily. So if I just camera shake, there we go. So when you just click on that, it just turns off the camera shake completely. And I'll just show you both of those options. So on camera shake, all I'm doing, toggle camera shake. So all I'm doing here is I'm flip-flopping true or false, which gives me a value of 0 or 1, which sets again in the scalar parameter value, a value called shake scale. And then anytime I play a camera shake event, so if I go to my chicken blueprint, which has replaced my third-person character, all I do whenever I'm doing a play camera shake event is I'm checking to see what that strength value is, and then scaling my camera shake appropriately. And that's going to allow me to kind of very easily control, kind of any of my camera shake properties. And then inside, I'll just show you the go to PP. This is the simple kind of like background control here. So I'm using my scene depth and custom depth and doing a comparison between the two, and then I'm just kind of darkening around that. So I kind of do a background fade on that, which will increase it slightly, and then I multiply that back into my post-process input 0, which is my final rendered scene, and that will give me the kind of the darkened edges. And then any asset that I want to have that custom depth on, I just need to on the actor, so on this chicken, if I just type in custom, we have a render custom depth variable and a set for that. So I think I'm actually doing that on this particular instance of the character. Just check there. Yeah. So I've got my render custom depth pass enabled. and I've got a custom stencil value. And what's really nice about the stencil value is that we can use that to differentiate between lots of different object types. So we can have a lot of different stencil layers, and you can create filters and layers that will mask and create different patterns or shapes or colors based on each individual one. So if I wanted to have a chicken override color and an enemy override color, and let's say I added a fox to the game that was going to kind of hunt the chicken, I wanted to add that. Again, you can add that by just changing each of those characters to use a different stencil value, and then using a different color parameter for each individual stencil. And I'm just going to double check that that covers everything. Great action shot of the chicken there. Yeah, I think that covers all of those. Victor, did you want to do any questions on that, if there are any, or should I move on to the next topic?
We did receive a follow-up on the standardized subtitle format question. .bmt followed up with, in film and television, you have standardized subtitle files to attach to a video. For example, StarVTT, SRT, TTML. Is it possible to import that sort of file alongside your audio files to use those for the subtitles? And I don't think that we have that feature.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think the reason for that, and I am guessing here, but I would think the reason for that is that the text data needs to generate a localized string so that it can be gathered correctly by the localization tools that are built into the engine. So I think you would have to set that data manually inside the editor.
Cool. Yeah, that was it. Please move along.
Okay. Oh, one thing to add. It's worth checking out Paolo's talk on the localization, because actually, when you have a text file, you can mark that inside a kind of a pre-made array. So you could probably load it in that way and then just mark up the subtitling that way. But yeah, I don't think there's import options for those particular ones. Cool. So next up, we're on to cognitive and input. Now these ones are they're a bit trickier, and they can require potentially a lot more work than some of the other tools, which are more kind of like filters and layering and options. And these often require a lot more thought in terms of how you're designing and building your game. That being said, there are some other, some built-in features that you can use to make, make it a bit easier. So difficulty obviously is a really key one for cognitive and input. A lot of these two things are shared. So kind of allowing the player to control time limits, or giving them options to have infinite time, or often reversing the design can make things better. So rather than having a time limit on a particular task, allow players to have as much time as they need to complete the task, but then reward players for completing under a certain time. I think actually the new Crash Bandicoot did quite a good job of this by flipping lives around. So rather than having kind of like a set number of lives that you had to live by, you were just rewarded for using under a certain amount per map. So time limits, game speed is another one, and again we actually have some controls for that, which are really useful if you want to slow down, kind of how the game progresses, and obviously immortality as well. So again, this one's not necessarily an easy one to add, because you may need to kind of account for a lot of different parameters based on the type of game that you're building. Creating a practice mode or training arenas are good for pretty much everyone, not just people who have cognitive abilities, but it's also really useful for them because it allows them to kind of practice in a very low stress way, and kind of practice particular areas of the game as well. One thing that's often recommended as well is to avoid player taunts. So if you do want to add player taunts in where the game berates the player or makes fun of them, is to maybe save that for the harder difficulty modes and remove that from some of the lower difficulty modes, or have an option to remove that completely. Again, with the audio settings that are available inside the editor, these are actually really easy things to add into their own filter type. So you could create a sound class that is, kind of player-beration, and then allow it so that you can actually just filter that completely inside the game quite easily. And then having iconography can be really helpful as well for people who struggle to read or people who can't read at all. And that will kind of allow people to use it. I found that doing just one does not work well. You need to generally kind of stack these options. So if you do icons, don't just do iconography. Pair that icon with text, and then ideally pair that icon with an audio cue as well. So we're going to cover just a few of these very, very quickly. So the core one with game speed, you can set time dilation for your game, and that allows you to slow down the game for any for any setting. Now again, this does get a bit more complex if you're already using this as part of your gameplay. You may get some interference when you're setting it, but if you're not using it, you could technically tie this to a button and have it toggleable so that players can turn on and off a slow game speed mode very easily. So, you can kind of set this to like half speed or 0.1 or whatever, and setting that back up to 1 whenever you want. And that would allow the player who might have cognitive disabilities when they're going through a particularly challenging part of the game to just slow things down a bit, so that they can, kind of focus on getting those button presses down correctly.
And there's no implementation other than that the developer has to make, right? It will just slow down the tick rate for everything.
Yeah, it slows everything down. It's really really useful for lots of different things.
Like bullet time.
It has an accessibility use case as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just on top of that, I could have mentioned this inside the audio cue as well, but all of the buttons have they'll inside their style, they actually have sound cues that can be played. So in this one, I've got a colorblind sound cue that just says colorblind mode, right? And that means that players can use this to kind of like get the correct audio cue so that they know what they're about to press. And again, that audio cue can be filtered into. Sorry, I'm not used to using a single screen. That mode can be filtered into a special class. So in this instance, it's called button over. And then you can turn on and off that class as you need for players who want to be able to kind of hear what the button is actually going to do. We also have full screen reader support for the game as well. I do have that up. It can be a little bit finicky to get right. I might try and get it working right at the end. It does require a little bit of setup from another program in order to get going. And then it's really annoying once you have got it going because it will speak everything. So I'll save that bit right for the end as maybe a bit of an extra. And then cognitive often ties directly into input as well, because people who have cognitive disabilities will often have kind of a potential motor disabilities as well to go along with that. So the kind of the key thing with input is got to be controller remapping, and that's something that is built directly into the editor. Let's go over that now actually, and then we'll cover some of the other topics. So remapping is an easy thing to get working. You can, if I go to my graph here, I've got a very quick example set up, and actually Matthew Wadstein, who does the HTF and WTF YouTube videos, has a really nice video on setting this all up as well. So definitely worth checking those things out. But basically, it derives from this function called for get input settings, right? And what we can do here is we can remove an input action mapping, and we can add an action mapping. And we can also search through all of our action mappings as well for a particular action type. And we can also do axis mapping as well. So we can go through basically every single input type, and then we can let the player remap to whatever we want, whatever they want for that particular thing. And this is really easy on this side of things. The most difficult thing is going through the grunt work of setting up all of the UI in order to get that to work. So for this particular one, all I'm doing is I'm remapping my peck action name, which does that kind of peck on the ground, from the left mouse button to the right mouse button. Right, so it's an arbitrary thing, but it's a nice and easy thing to get working. Like I said, the difficult thing on that is actually just going through and setting up the functionality for it. So there's just a few extra bits on that I haven't put into this particular functionality, but have got it in here. So get action mapping names will retrieve all of the different inputs that you might have for that particular type. So for peck, the left mouse button does it, but also the space bar does it, and also the A button on the gamepad does it as well. And then when you're happy with those, you can save the key mappings. Just remember to always have a copy of the original key mappings that you can restore to, because it is quite a destructive process. And I found it will actually override your project setting inputs as well. So when you're setting this stuff up, definitely make sure you're storing this. You can export these project settings to files. I recommend doing that for this particular one, just so when you're going through, you're not accidentally breaking a load of stuff as you're going through. So once you've got controller mappings, the next most important thing, that work? Yeah. One of the other really important things is having optionality to reduce actual inputs on the gamepad, and that comes from several different avenues, right? So you can automate button presses based on certain events. So things like automatically firing when a character's, kind of looking at a particular character, or having toggleable options, right, rather than pressing and holding. So pressing and holding can be really difficult for lots of different people for lots of different reasons. And having an option where you can just press the button and set it going, rather than having it so that they have to continuously hold a button, is really useful. So if you're doing something like a first-person or third-person shooter, having the player have to hold down that fire button can be quite difficult. And this could only get more difficult with some of the new kind of like haptic feedback, where there's actual kind of like resistance when you're trying to push this stuff down. So be really careful when you're kind of building your tools. So I've added a few ones to the chicken game just as an example. So one of them is auto camera. So at the moment, I'm using my mouse to look around, and I'm using WASD to move around. So if I turn this on, what it will do is it will, let's try that again. Nope, just turned off camera shake, auto camera. What this will do is it will automatically try and keep the camera behind the player. And that means that I now can play with just a single hand rather than two hands, whereas before I would have to use the mouse in order to move around effectively. What I've also done as well, and this is kind of a secondary option, is, I'll just turn on auto camera, there we go. Is I've actually set my peck to automatically do it when it overlaps with a worm, right? Because actually forcing the player to have to go up and press the button whenever they get to it is an unnecessary action, right? They've already done the goal of moving to that particular actor, so I don't need to force them to do it. So I can kind of set that to automatically go. And if we take a look at the chicken, third person BP. I've got my peck code here, so I've got my button press, and when that's pressed, I stop movement, play my montage event, which is my chicken, and then I do an overlap check to see if I've overlapped with a worm, and if I do, then I trigger that worm to die. And then I also have the camera shake stuff as well. But all I've done is I've added in an extra bit of code which does the actor begin overlap, and then when it detects that overlap, as long as the auto cam is enabled, it will just go through and filter that. And then the same with my movement type as well. So I have a Boolean here, which will override, or it will kind of add in that kind of the camera controller yaw input to the move right input, so that when I'm kind of moving around, it will automatically filter that stuff out for me. So anything that can reduce down the number of buttons that can be that need to be pressed, and anything that reduces down the number of buttons that need to be held, can be really useful for people who have these different, kind of cognitive and motor disabilities. This can expand massively as well. So you can have aim assist or auto aiming for different games and for menus. You can also add, kind of difficulty adjustments for time speed, game speed, and immortality. Same as with cognitive. So just to kind of sum up some of the core features that are available, full controller remapping support is available, as well as a screen reader, which you can enable with third-party tool, and it will then read anything that you're hovering over. Same with subtitling as well. That's built right into the engine. Colorblind correction, which incidentally also works on the editor as well. So you can actually remap the editor color to be colorblind friendly. UI scaling and audio mixing. Then kind of some key features, which we've already discussed in some of the Q&A, that will require some programming work in order to get kind of working more fully, is extended subtitle support, so allowing to change in game the font sizing, the having automated color for multiple speakers is a common one. I don't think that's a common one in the States. I think that might be more of an EU or UK based one. But when you're talking between multiple people, the subtitles will often get colored to particular people as they're speaking, so that it's clear who's talking for each one. And then options for speaker identification as well. So having a kind of a prefix to the subtitles to tell you who that person is that's currently speaking. All of those things are doable inside the editor, but aren't there's no out-of-the-box solution for that. Input switching on UMG and mouse for mouse and gamepad. So there is some base support for that, but it can be quite finicky to set up, especially when you're trying to implement things like hover support for buttons. That doesn't currently work with focusing and using gamepad, so you will need to do some extra work for that particular type. And then also there is a thing called speech mapping, which you might have noticed. I think it was added in 4.23, and that allows you to do voice commands. But at the moment, I think that only works for HoloLens, so I couldn't get that working using kind of standard voice commands. That being said, doing standard voice commands for the actual buttons themselves does still work. So while I can't code a thing to say peck and then the character will peck, I can do something like saying left mouse or left click, and that would still do the same action. And yeah, I think that's it.
Was that it?
I'm done.
That's really good though.
Have I gone massively under or over time? Or
not at all. We got plenty of time left. We're not even on 1 hour yet. Didn't have a few more questions. The main one that I saw repeated a couple of times is, and we talked about this just prior to the stream, will the project and the slide deck be available for download?
Yes. So I'll give Victor a link to the project, and then you can download it and do whatever you want with the mess. I should say this isn't a demonstration of how a game should be built. This is a demonstration of multiple accessibility features ham-fistedly clutched together. So just keep that in mind.
Well, it's awesome because my mom was watching the stream and she said that she really wanted to play the chicken game. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, most people are probably in it for the chicken at this point, I think.
Let's see here. Burgos Games asked earlier in regards to the captions, will we be able to adjust font scaling during runtime?
So not out of the box. So it's a set font and it's a set font size. when you do it. So again, this is kind of one of the things that I have asked for. It's on kind of like my wish list of accessibility features to get added to the engine, and I think it's something that is likely to get added. So I'm hoping it does get added eventually, but at the moment you would need to code your own solution.
Which engine version are you in for this project?
It's 4.25.
2.5.
Yeah. 4.26 came in a bit too hot as it came out today. I do not want to upgrade
hours before the stream. Yeah, good call.
Yeah.
Let's see. Answer that one. Reflection Rip asked, are the localized strings separate from the build so you can add additional languages after you ship?
No, I think they are part of the build.
Yeah, because you have to generate the cultures.
Might be able to do some separation, but you would have to patch. That's for sure. You could probably chunk the content into separate bits, so you could have the localizer one maybe. But no, it all has to kind of be part of the same build, unless you handled your localization, kind of externally or something like that. But no.
Yeah, I know there's a compilation step. Check out the localization stream that we did with Paulo for that. He goes through the entire process and also how you can use CSV files for some of that. Let's see. Oh, we're getting some more questions here. The main Stark asked, what is the common solution for mouse/gamepad remapping? I noticed when rebinding using the built-in editor functions, it doesn't detect mouse movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is one that comes up quite a lot, and I've had a number of conversations with the UMG team who are very, very much aware of that issue. I've got a solution that I tend to use that you're more than welcome to copy. So the ideal is that you code an interface, right? And but if you aren't a programmer, that's a difficult option for you. So one option that I tend to go for is I'll generate an action mapping event for use gamepad and mouse, and all I do is detect whether that particular interface is being used. And then inside the controller for the character, I check that event and make sure it executes when paused and it doesn't consume the input. And then I do a switch on that particular input type, so that is not getting called over and over again. And I have an event dispatcher for gamepad and mouse, and then I update that particular input type. And then any interface that I want to switch between the two, I bind that particular event to that interface. So if I go to my accessibility tricks, I have the binding example here. So in this one, I'm setting the game to paused. You don't necessarily need to do that, but you would need to suspend the input from the character. And then what I do is I get my controller ref, which I'm doing on the initialization step. And then I call the bind to event gamepad and bind to event mouse. And that event will then get triggered every time I switch from gamepad to a mouse input. And then I can set up some properties that will mean that the mouse will work and the gamepad will work. So for this one, when I want to switch to mouse, I make sure that the mouse cursor is visible, which should happen anyway because I'm switching to game and UI. And then I switch to the input mode to game and UI so that works. And then if I'm doing gamepad, I set my input mode to game only, hide my mouse, and then set the user focus to the kind of the most logical actor for it to work with. So in this case, I'm setting it to the first button that's going on. And then what that will do is it will allow me to do standard focus control. So this will then mean that all of my navigation input for gamepad and for keyboard will be handled correctly. Though the downside to this is that the buttons won't know to switch to a hovered mode. So you would need to have a secondary solution for that, but you can call an event when that button is focusable, right? So the idea is that you switch to a different event on focus. And then also the A button or the X button, depending on which gamepad you're using, will then automatically work for confirm. So whenever you press that button, that event will fire, and that does work with the standard button types. Same with the spacebar on the keyboard and the arrow keys as you navigate and move forward. And then you can handle your input types like that. It is reasonably complex to do, and it does take a fair bit of work in order to get working. But the reason behind it is that there's lots of different games and lots of different input modes, and kind of as an engine, you don't necessarily know what input mode people are going to choose and use. So the tools need to be agnostic enough that they'll work for any. But having said that, I've spoken to the UI team already about this, and there's conversations ongoing. I'll probably leave it at that.
I must say, your technique for detecting if a gamepad is used is super clever, just using the action axis events. That's a really nice tip.
Yeah, there's loads of there's other ways of doing it as well. You can do a function override to detect when a key's been pressed, and then generate all of your events based on that. But this one I found to be the kind of the simplest solution that doesn't involve shoving a ton of stuff into the event tick, which you really don't want to do. Another one is having a different player controller class for your UI mode, and then you switch between the controllers when you go into that mode, and then that controller handles all of the input and navigation, and the user interface kind of receives those.
That's great. Let's see if we got some. I think that was it on the questions, actually. Yep, in terms of accessibility at least. Thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on and prepping the project. I'll make sure that we get the project up and available for y'all. You can find a link to that in the forum announcement post for this live stream. You can also go to a subsection that's called asset sharing. It's available on the first channel page of the forums. And there you can find other samples and projects that we've made available in regards to our live streams, and sometimes just related to a blog post or something similar. So that's great. Before I let you go, Aaron, I do want to mention that tomorrow we are doing essentially 2 live streams. It's going to be a long one. We are starting off with the 2020 Epic Mega Jam Kickoff. Let's go ahead and get us full screen here. We're starting off with the 2020 Epic Mega Jam Kickoff. We will announce the theme. It starts at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We will announce the theme around 3 p.m. And then once that is done, we are actually doing a separate stream together with Microsoft, where we will be showing off how you can develop a HoloLens 2 application with Unreal Engine and the mixed reality UX tools. So we have 4 developers from the mixed reality developer platform team at Microsoft coming on. So that's super exciting. Those links, I should go ahead and get those to you in chat right now. That's the Mega Jam one. Then the other one, make sure you check that out, and make sure you sign up for the jam in time. We will be talking all about that tomorrow, so I'm gonna leave it for that. But before we finish this, I also do want to mention that if you've been watching us from the start today, thank you so much for hanging out. Hope this has been useful for you. Chat, give it up for Aaron for prepping this project and being as awesome as always, presenting very clear. If you are new to Unreal Engine and you're curious about game development, you should go ahead and check out unrealengine.com, where you can download the Epic Games Launcher, and that will give you access to the binary version of Unreal Engine. You can also find a bunch of resources on the launcher, but I would also recommend that if you're just getting started, check out Unreal Online Learning. I think we have about 160 episodes or hours actually, of courses available covering all kinds of things in Unreal Engine. It's a great site to learn. And then, of course, make sure you check out our community creators on YouTube as well. In regards to accessibility, we do caption all of our live streams. Our caption contractor, Courtney, she transcribes all the live streams, and after roughly a week after the video goes live on YouTube, you can turn on captions that are much more accurate than YouTube's automatic ones, especially when it comes to some of the terminology that's technical. It can be difficult for that to caption it, so we make sure that we do that manually to make sure that we get it right. That transcript is also available to download in case you were looking for something in the live stream and you can't really remember when we were talking about it. You can go ahead and download the transcript, Control F, search for keywords, and see when we were talking about that. super useful. I've done that myself sometimes to figure out, when did we talk about that? Like Tom Shannon showed something really useful and I didn't remember where it was, but I knew a keyword, so I went ahead and searched for that and I could find it. We do timestamp all the videos on YouTube now, so that's also another good way to find a good section of the stream that you're looking for. Make sure that you let us know how we did today. If we can go ahead and get the survey posted. We want recommendations for what we can cover here on the stream, as well as how we did, what we did well, what we didn't do so well. Please make sure you go ahead and fill that out. If you are interested in meeting more developers around the world, communities.unrealengine.com is a place where you can find and join and also organize local meetups. Clearly, none of us are visiting any meetups in real life right now, but plenty of them are doing virtual meetups on Discord, so go ahead and check that out. If there's none in your local area and you would like to become one of the meetup group leaders, there's a form that you can fill out. Go ahead and get in touch with us and we will hopefully get back to you. We have plenty of online communities. Make sure you check out our forums. Unrealslackers.org is our unofficial Discord community, as well as Facebook and Reddit. If you have been watching this from the beginning again, thanks very much. We do have a community spotlight every week. Make sure you let us know what you're working on so that we can see and promote all the awesome things that are happening around the community. You can go ahead and post it on the forums. We check Twitter, Unreal Slackers. We try to exist everywhere where you guys are. We are also looking for more countdown videos at the beginning of the stream. They are normally 30 minutes of development captured on your PC, and then fast forward that to 5 minutes and send that separate together with your logo, and then we will go ahead and composite together the countdown, etc. If you stream on Twitch, make sure you use the Unreal Engine tag and the game development tag. That makes it very easy for us to find you and for others in the community if they're interested to see what you're doing live. It's a great place to be. Good to hang out. Sometimes when I've been streaming, I've learned more myself than I've been able to teach my audience, which is pretty awesome. Make sure you follow us on social media, and if you're watching the VOD on YouTube, make sure you hit that notification bell so that you can see all of the things that we're releasing on our YouTube channel. And like I said, next week we are tomorrow we're doing the 2020 Epic Mega Jam kickoff, a little bit of a special double Inside Unreal, triple almost Inside Unreal episodes this week. And then next week, we have Patrick Wambold on the stream, and he's going to talk about the new DMX features in Unreal Engine. DMX is sort of an interface that allows you to control lighting using hardware, and we have implementation for that in Unreal Engine now, and you're actually able to do both things. You can control Unreal Engine using DMX controls, which is really cool, but you can also use Unreal Engine to control real-world lighting, and Patrick has prepared a really cool presentation for us that he's going to share next week. Aaron, thanks again for coming on and showing us this presentation. It's been great to have you. I think we will see you on the stream at some point in the future.
Oh yeah,
definitely. Do you have something you can...
Give you a better time away from me and then we'll come back.
Do you have any idea what you might be covering in the future?
I mean, I'm happy to open it up to some community feedback. If there's any features that you'd like to get more coverage, then I'm happy to put put talks together and cover more stuff. Anything that kind of integrates the chicken into that tech, I'm happy to do. But yeah, it's just part of the kind of the evangelism team. Just want to make sure that people have got as much as they can to make their games the best games possible.
And there are more resources that aren't just our live streams. I know that we have a couple of presentations coming out from the evangelism team that are being solely released onto YouTube as well. So make sure to check that out. Paulo did an awesome tutorial on how to use how to build AI in Unreal Engine. That went live, I think, earlier this week. Make sure you check that out if you're interested in AI. It is phenomenal. Good job, Paulo. I need Paulo back on the stream at some point as well. Maybe we can do a little deep dive if people had questions in regards to the AI. That would be really cool. Anyway, thank you all for hanging out today. Thanks to Aaron. Y'all are awesome. We will see you again tomorrow, hopefully. Make sure you sign up for the Mega Jam and have a good, fun, creative week. But like I said, we're going to talk all about that tomorrow. So until then, bye and take care, everyone.